How could a single night of hedonism, excess, and scandal nearly bring down one of the world's most powerful empires? Imagine a feast so outrageous, so legendary, that for centuries, rulers tried to erase it from the record, and historians still argue over what really happened. But the truth is, this wasn't just a wild party. This was a banquet that shook the very foundations of an empire, revealing the rot at its core and triggering a crisis that nearly tore it apart. Tonight on History Owl, we're diving headfirst into the wildest banquet in history, the infamous Banquet of the Chestnuts, and the chaos it unleashed on Renaissance Europe. Let's set the scene. It's October 1501. We're in Rome, the heart of the Catholic Church, but not the Rome you might imagine. This is a city of intrigue, ambition, and vice, a place where fortunes are made and lost overnight, and where the most powerful family in Italy rules not just through piety, but through cunning, violence, and scandal. At the center of it all is the Borgia family, Pope Alexander VI and his children, Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia. A dynasty so notorious for their ruthlessness and decadence that their very name would become a byword for corruption. Now, Renaissance Rome was no stranger to excess. Feasts in the Vatican were often lavish affairs, with gold plates, flowing wine, music, and dancing. But what happened on the night of October 30, 1501, would make even jaded Romans stop and stare. In the Apostolic Palace, under the gilded ceilings of the papal apartments, the Pope's son Cesare Borgia, Duke of Valentinois, former cardinal, and infamous warlord, decided to throw a celebration unlike any other. The guest list? The most powerful men in Christendom, cardinals, nobles, and, if the rumors are true, even the Pope himself. But this was no ordinary banquet. It would become known as the Banquet of the Chestnuts, and its details were so shocking that even chroniclers who thrived on scandal hesitated to record them. According to one account, 50 courtesans, yes, 50, were invited to entertain the guests. The tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, exotic fruits, and, of course, chestnuts, which were scattered across the floor. The guests dined, drank, and watched as the courtesans performed a dance that would put any modern burlesque show to shame. And then, things took an even darker turn. As the night wore on, the courtesans, and the guests, were encouraged to shed their inhibitions, and their clothing, engaging in a contest to see who could couple the most times, with prizes of silks, jewels, and gold for the most athletic participants. By the end of the night, the line between feast and orgy had disappeared entirely. The chronicler Johannes Burchard, the Pope's own master of ceremonies, wrote that candles were brought in, and chestnuts scattered on the floor, over which the courtesans crawled, picking them up as they moved, while the Pope, Cesare, and Lucrezia looked on. Now, you might be thinking, was it really that wild? Could the highest officials of the Church, the very people who claimed to be God's representatives on earth, really have presided over such a scandalous scene? For centuries, historians debated whether the Banquet of the Chestnuts was fact or fiction, a smear campaign invented by the enemies of the Borgias. But as more contemporary documents have come to light, the consensus has shifted. While some details may have been exaggerated, there's little doubt that something extraordinary, and extraordinarily depraved, happened that night. But why does it matter? Why should one night of excess threaten an entire empire? Here's where things get truly interesting. The Banquet of the Chestnuts wasn't just a private party gone wrong. It was a symbol of everything that was rotten and unstable at the heart of Renaissance Rome. The Pope himself was entangled in scandal, his family wielded power like a private army, and the Vatican, supposed to be the moral compass of Christendom, had become, in the eyes of many, a den of vice. News of the banquet spread like wildfire, not just through Rome but across Europe. Ambassadors wrote home in horror. Church reformers seized on the story as proof that the papacy was irredeemably corrupt. Even the Pope's allies began to distance themselves. Let's pause for a second. Can you imagine being a devout Christian in 1501, hearing that your spiritual leaders were throwing orgies while preaching chastity from the pulpit? The sense of betrayal was profound. For many, this was the final straw. The power of the Church depended not just on armies or gold, but on moral authority. And now, that authority was crumbling. But the consequences didn't stop at bad press. The scandal fueled the fires of reform across Europe. Within 2 decades, Martin Luther would nail his 95 Theses to the door of a church in Wittenberg, launching the Protestant Reformation and splitting Christendom in two. The Banquet of the Chestnuts became Exhibit A for those who argued that Rome was beyond saving. Even today, you can draw a straight line from the excesses of the Borgia court to the religious upheavals that reshaped Europe forever. But what about the people at the center of it all? The Borgias were nothing if not survivors. Pope Alexander VI tried to ride out the scandal, blaming his enemies for spreading lies. Cesare Borgia used the chaos as cover for even bolder power grabs, launching a campaign of conquest across Italy that would make him both feared and hated. Lucrezia Borgia, often portrayed as either a helpless pawn or a femme fatale, was married off to cement political alliances, her reputation forever stained by rumors that she had participated in her family's darkest deeds. And yet, for all their cunning, the banquet marked the beginning of the end for the Borgia dynasty. Within a few years, Alexander VI was dead. Many believe he was poisoned, and Caesar's empire crumbled as his enemies closed in. The Vatican itself underwent a slow, painful process of reform, as new popes tried to clean house and restore the Church's reputation. But the memory of the Banquet of the Chestnuts lingered, a symbol of how absolute power can corrupt even the holiest of institutions. Now, let's dig a little deeper. Was this the wildest banquet in history, or just the most notorious? The truth is, the Renaissance was an era of spectacular parties, where nobles and royals competed to outdo each other with displays of wealth and taste. Think of the Field of the Cloth of Gold, where Henry VIII and Francis I tried to dazzle the world with pavilions of gold and fountains of wine. Or the wedding feasts of the Medici in Florence, where entire palazzos were transformed into gardens of earthly delights. But the Banquet of the Chestnuts stands out not just for its excess, but for what it revealed about its hosts. Most feasts were meant to project stability and grandeur. This one exposed the chaos and decadence lurking beneath the surface. It was as if, for one night, the masks slipped and the world saw the truth. That the people running the show were all too human, driven by the same desires, weaknesses, and ambitions as anyone else. It's tempting to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Cardinals getting drunk, courtesans chasing chestnuts across marble floors. But there's a darker lesson here, too. Throughout history, the downfall of great powers has often begun not with armies at the gates, but with rot from within. The Romans had their own infamous feasts. Think of Nero's Golden House, or Caligula's orgies. Each a sign that the empire's glory days were numbered. But there's another reason why the Banquet of the Chestnuts still fascinates us. It's a story about the clash between public virtue and private vice, about the danger of unchecked power, and about how even the mightiest can be brought low by their own appetites. In a way, it's a warning that echoes across the centuries. Of course, not everyone believed the official story. Even at the time, some argued that the banquet was a hoax, invented by the Pope's enemies to discredit him. The chronicler Burchard, who provided the most lurid account, was no fan of the Borgias. Others pointed out that Renaissance Rome was full of gossip and exaggeration. If even half the stories were true, the city would have burned to the ground in scandal years before. But here's the thing. Whether or not every detail is true, the fact that people believed it tells us everything we need to know about the mood of the time. The very idea that such a banquet could have happened, that cardinals and popes might have presided over an orgy, shows just how fragile the Church's reputation had become. Trust, once lost, is hard to regain. And what about the courtesans, the so-called entertainers of the night? Their stories, largely lost to history, remind us that behind every scandal are real people, often forgotten by the official record. In Renaissance Rome, courtesans occupied a strange position, celebrated for their wit and beauty, yet also marginalized and exploited. For a brief moment, at the Banquet of the Chestnuts, they were at the center of the world's attention, but at what cost? So, what do we make of it all? Was the Banquet of the Chestnuts a symptom of a dying empire? Or just another crazy night in a city famous for its excess? Maybe it was both. What's certain is that it left a mark on history that can't be erased. It became a symbol of corruption, a rallying cry for reformers, and a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks power is a license to do whatever they want. And yet, the story doesn't end there. The legacy of the banquet lived on in art, literature, and legend. The Borgias became villains in plays, novels, and even TV shows. The Vatican, for its part, tried to move on, but the stain remained. And every so often, when another scandal rocks the halls of power, anywhere in the world, someone remembers the night when chestnuts rolled across the marble floors of the Vatican, and whispers, "Have we really changed so much?" So next time you hear about a wild party, a political scandal, or a fall from grace, remember the banquet of the chestnuts. Remember how one night of excess can reveal the cracks in the foundations of power. And remember that history is full of lessons, if we're willing to pay attention. If you enjoyed this journey into the wildest banquet in history, and want more stories that peel back the velvet curtain on the past, make sure you subscribe to History Owl. We dig into the scandals, secrets, and turning points that shaped our world, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Leave a comment below with the wildest historical rumor you've ever heard, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep your eyes on history, and your chestnuts off the floor.